Congressional offices were flooded with phone calls Thursday from devastated teens who heard that lawmakers might be banning their beloved TikTok. The House Energy and Commerce Committee was set to vote on a bill that would force TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, which is based in China, to divest the app. If ByteDance and TikTok refused to decouple, they would face being banned in the U.S. TikTok responded by flooding American users with a pop-up message warning them that they could lose access to the app. The notification urged TikTokers to call their representatives and tell them to oppose the legislation. Multiple House offices reported that they received thousands of calls on the issue. This included calls from kids and teens threatening to commit suicide or threatening to harm the people in the office if they could no longer use TikTok.
Despite the angry phone calls, the committee voted unanimously to advance the bill. Speaker Mike Johnson can now bring the legislation to the House floor for a vote, which seems likely. Johnson supports divesting TikTok from ByteDance, saying in a statement, it's an important bipartisan measure to take on China, which is our largest geopolitical foe and is actively undermining our economy and security. So obviously, I love TikTok. And when I see this, I'm not surprised. We've seen in the Senate, the Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA, also bans apps which have infinite scrolling features. They describe the functionality of TikTok and ban it. The bill is not a TikTok ban by name, but that's effectively what it would be. You know, we don't see that bill moving forward quite as quickly as this one, but it does seem that if it passes in the House, it would pass in the Senate. But I just don't think this is a policy that's popular. I think it's definitely not popular among young people. And it seems to me that it's a form of censorship to want to ban this app where 60% of the shareholders of ByteDance are not Chinese, to frame this as a way to, weed out foreign interference in American society. It just seems pretty dishonest when that's true of the parent company. And also you have TikTok being a US-based company as well.
The fundamental problem for me, I guess, is that even though the shareholders are mostly not Chinese, any company that has its headquarters in China or is considered a Chinese company is under the thumb of the Chinese Communist Party. That's just how it works there. If you're doing business in China, you're beholden to what the CCP wants you to do. ByteDance has been pretty cagey about whether or not they share data with the Chinese Communist Party. They've claimed that they protect users, but realistically, that's just not how things function with the CCP. So I'm very skeptical of those claims. And then the other issue that I have is that TikTok has been found before to be manipulating algorithms and censoring content based on what narratives are convenient or inconvenient to the CCP. So, for example, the CCP would not allow a lot of pro-Hong Kong, free Hong Kong content on the platform back when those protests were happening. And the CCP even bans our version of TikTok in their country. They have a very different version that's basically quite sanitized and is aimed at sort of building future valuable Chinese citizens. And so at that point, based on the control that they have over the app and the lack of the ability of the U.S. to have oversight over it because it's not fundamentally a U.S.-owned business, means that the CCP is using it as a manipulation tool to help advance certain narratives and propaganda for them in the United States. And so that renders it a national security concern, not to mention the fact that it's already banned on federal devices because of the ability for it to be used as spyware.
Now, given that TikTok's, a U.S.-based company, it's very unlikely that the CCP is involved. We had the CEO testify in Congress saying he has no ties to the CCP. He's from Singapore. He's not Chinese, that there are no ties between TikTok and the CCP. I just think it's interesting that you have Congress taking such swift action on TikTok, which is, an online app, a form of entertainment, a place where people scroll and consume content. There's all kinds of censorship on algorithms used that are social media in the United States, but there's also a lot of Chinese-owned land and Saudi Arabian-owned land and resources in the United States. And for them to care more about TikTok than care more about the farmland in the United States, our arable land where we grow our food, it's really hypocritical in my eyes. It seems to me that they care about what's on TikTok because they can't control the information that's on TikTok in the same way they've been able to on other social media apps like Meta and Instagram and Facebook, like Twitter in the past. It seems to me that it's really about censorship and controlling the narrative within the United States, not because the CCP controls the narrative on TikTok, because I really don't think they do. There's been a lot of things that have been suppressed on TikTok simply because they don't like political content altogether. They want it to be a place where advertisers feel comfortable and people feel comfortable, spending money on TikTok Shop and off of the ads on the app. It's more so a lean towards profitability than it is a lean in any political direction. That being said, what is popular does do well in the algorithm. And I think our elected officials are afraid that a lot of what the youth finds popular politically in terms of ideas and policy goes against what they find popular and what they support policy-wise. I think they're afraid because this is one form of media in the United States that they can't control.
You made a couple of good points there, and I think the best person to look to on this issue as someone who is very logically consistent across the board is Josh Hawley, the Republican senator from Missouri, because he has raised obviously the same concerns that I just did about TikTok, but has also been very big on trying to change the control that big tech and government have right now in terms of controlling U.S. narratives and U.S. political spaces, in terms of Meta, Twitter, or X now, I guess, et cetera. And he's introduced a lot of these bills that would basically try to ensure that people do have free speech rights on social media, and also addressing the concerns about addiction among young people and the potential that it has to sort of change their brain chemistry, which has been confirmed through several studies. And then there's also a lot of Republicans who are talking about this Chinese farmland issue, which is 100% a legitimate one. I think no question we should ban foreign ownership of farmland, and frankly, a lot of the ability for Chinese nationals to purchase a lot of residential housing, which they are doing now too, is concerning because they're trying to really wedge their way into the real estate market, which is another national security concern. So I agree, they should absolutely be focused on both of those issues. And TikTok is not the only concern. All of these social media companies, all of these big tech companies wield a lot of power when it comes to discourse and the public square as we imagine it in our society now. And I think the bill is good because it does offer this alternative solution, right? TikTok can decouple from ByteDance, which is the parent company, which is the real concern. TikTok itself is a U.S. company. So find a different investor or find a different parent company or go independent. You can still exist. You're just not allowed to be attached to this company that could have ties to the CCP, and probably does, because we know that that's how Chinese businesses operate.
Yeah, I think in the case of TikTok, when you have an app that has these features, sure, you can say, oh, well, this app is changing the brain chemistry of the users that it has. But also you have the same functionality now being adopted by Reels, being adopted by the scrolling feature for videos on X, formerly known as Twitter, Meta's apps, including Instagram. So, when it's accessible, the same exact feature that's deemed dangerous on all of these other social media apps, you really, do think it's because TikTok can't be controlled by the US government. I think I'm afraid of living in a global economy where you have the United States able to control exclusively the media that's had in the US. We're supposed to have a free press. And I think that means that we should be able to, if we want to, use the app provided by a company, even if their parent company is based in another country. The fact that we allow AIPAC, which is explicitly a pro-Israel PAC, allowed to lobby our members of Congress to directly influence policy, but we're concerned about the public consuming entertainment and information on a social media app. I think if we're worried about foreign interference, we have a lot of other things that should be the priority before TikTok. I think really what this comes down to is, although we have a constitutional right to free press, we really haven't enjoyed that in the United States. We've seen, extreme control of the government over our press, and the elites having really the same agenda in terms of what information they should push, what political agenda they really want to be on the front pages of the papers and now online media in the United States when people are consuming news. That's really scary. And so that's kind of why I like TikTok, because it, I think, provides an alternative to a lot of the propaganda we get in our other media sources.
I think we should be careful about conflating freedom of speech with freedom of press, though, because these social media companies and TikTok in particular have been very insistent on the fact that they are not publishers, that they don't view themselves as press, because that comes with a certain set of responsibilities and conditions under the law as well. And one of the debates that's been happening in Congress over the past few years is if they should start treating social media companies as publishers, because then they can be held accountable for certain censorship concerns that they're making through their algorithms or through the individuals that they have moderating content, and whether they have a responsibility to remain politically neutral. Right now, they basically don't have any liability under their terms of service. So there is a fundamental difference between how the U.S. approaches media outlets, as they're designated, and social media right now. Social media says they're not news outlets. And so there is a little bit of a difference there under the law. And then I would just add, finally, that I agree that these features that you're talking about, that some lawmakers want to put restrictions on, are consistent across all social media. And I think that is a separate conversation, and one that should be had, because I don't support it on any app, frankly, for young people. I think the age limit of 13 should be raised. But the primary chief concern that is addressed in this piece of legislation with TikTok is the potential for Chinese CCP interference. And I think it's a legitimate one to have. We do talk about foreign interference a lot in the American economy, in the American free speech, that's not the right way to say that, in American speech, American politics. All of these things are legitimate conversations to have, and I think that this bill mostly addresses the national security concern as opposed to some of the more quote-unquote dangerous features of social media, which, from what I've seen, Congress is consistent on wanting to limit those across all apps, not just on TikTok. And I'll give you 30 seconds to respond, Jess, because I don't want to just shoehorn my opinion in there and then cut it out, but then we're going to have to wrap for the week.
I will just say quickly on the front of TikTok being a form of press is a lot of people get their news on TikTok. It's the most popular online destination in the world. And it's not just independent journalists like me that use TikTok as a way they communicate news stories and keep people informed, but also, you have BBC News on there, you have Al Jazeera, a lot of them do live feeds to cover unfolding events. And so limiting what news is accessible on TikTok, I do think it's a relevant press concern. So that's just where I was coming from on that.
Totally understand, and thanks for clarifying. That's going to do it for us this week on Rising. Thanks again, Jessica. We are going to see you next week, of course. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Bye, y'all.